Hello and welcome back to the Scenario 7 podcast. Today I'm back hosting because once again Sam Cole is not here. He had a dig at me last week in the preview, so I'm going to have a dig back at him because I'm here and he's not here today. So you can start with me again hosting. Hope you don't mind. But as always, he is always here. Joe Roberts is here to do the preview with me. How are you, Joe Roberts?
I'm doing good, Josh. Thank you for being here. Sam's been slacking lately.
He was on holiday, to be fair, so we'll let him off for those ones. But this week he is slacking a bit. But like I said just a second ago, this is the Belgian Grand Prix review. And before we get into it, actually, I'm just going to say that it's great news from F1 this week that Spa is going to be on the calendar next year, which I think everyone is relieved for because it's such an iconic track and everyone loves it. Joe, what were your thoughts on that decision?
Yeah, I'm very happy about this. There's other tracks that should be going off the calendar, but I'm very happy that this track is going to stay on for next year, but hopefully for further years.
Good, lovely. Right, let's jump straight into it, and we'll start off with qualifying. So there wasn't actually much. And what should I say? Much difference to what we expected in qualifying. It's just the fact that there were quite a lot of grid penalties. So I'll go through the order of qualifying and then say who starts where in the actual race. So Q1, Vettel, Latifi, Magnussen, Tsunoda, and Bottas were all knocked out in Q1. And then for Q2, it was Ricciardo, Gasly, Zhou, Stroll, and Schumacher all out in Q2. And the top 10 for qualifying was Verstappen on pole, followed by Sainz, Perez, Leclerc, Ocon, Alonso, Hamilton, Russell, Albon, and Norris. So that was the order from qualifying, but because most of the drivers took grid penalties for engine changes, a lot of them went to the back of the grid. And those drivers were Bottas, Verstappen, Leclerc, Ocon, Norris, Zhou, and Schumacher. And then on Sunday morning, I believe Tsunoda took a penalty and he started from the pit lane instead of the back of the grid. So he also went back down the order as well. So that meant everyone else moved up position depending on where they were and where they qualified. So Sainz was actually on pole and then followed back down the rest of the order. You can probably work it out from the drivers who weren't actually in qualifying. But before we move on to the actual race, Joe, what are your thoughts on how this grid penalty works with everyone seeming to take a penalty for this week because they thought that it was a good track to overtake on? So what were your thoughts on this week?
I think it's, as in Martin Brundle said, I think it's a major issue in F1 at the moment because people could just put in an engine penalty, for example, last year, like Mercedes having I think it was like 5 or something stupid like that, and just in order to get the extra power and run it in a higher rev zone. So yeah, I'm a bit mixed about it. I think there should be a penalty when you go over the regulations, but also it's just like there needs to be a better way to make the racing more interesting. Obviously, it didn't really change the course of the race as we go into, but then there needs to be a better way because, for example, Leclerc got caught up in the melee, which basically meant he went to the back of the grid because of I think it was like something in his brake caller. So it's kind of a bit mixed about the engine penalties, but it does need to apply in order to make sure the big team just doesn't put a new engine in every single race.
Yeah, I do agree. Something needs to be changed for it to be more effective because, like you said there, even though it was a mixed up grid, the race result didn't actually differ to what it has been in past races. And we'll get onto that now on our thoughts on the race. And because of the mixed up grid, the first 10 laps of the race, minus the safety car, were actually quite exciting, I'd say. There was actually lots of people moving up and down in positions, and and accidents being caused, which we'll get onto later. But from there on in, after those opening laps or so, it was pretty much a parade, like most races are this season, which is quite annoying. But I'm sure they'll improve for next season. But Joe, what were your thoughts on this week's race?
I thought it was. I wouldn't say it's a dull race, because that would be kind of too disrespectful to Max. Because not last year, when Lewis was dominating, yes, there were boring races, but it was just utter domination from his talents, and also the car as well. And again, Max shown around Spa, they was just with one with the car and just absolutely dominated and made Perez look like he should be back in a Racing Point / Aston Martin. So yeah, it wasn't a good race from Perez, because in same machinery should be miles ahead, but Max was just on another planet. But I've seen a lot of comparisons between trying to compare it to Brazil last year from Hamilton. It's a completely different era of car, and also different track, because different lengths. Spa's almost double the length of Brazil. But I wouldn't compare it, because Max was just on another level, another planet, and this season he keeps on getting better and better, where his rivals keep on dwindling away. So it was just a dominant performance, and the one thing I would say, I'm at the moment getting very impressed with Russell, because he keeps on capitalizing on Ferrari's mistakes, and nearly got P3 if he didn't have a mistake in the last couple of laps. But if the overall race, it was just domination from Max. That's probably the word that you can use to describe this race.
Yeah, like you said, Max is in a completely different league of his own this weekend. I saw a video after the race of a fan who was actually at Spa, and you could tell once Max went past a certain corner, there was a good massive gap between him and the second place before he saw the next car, which just showed how much of a beast he is in that car this year, and he completely dominating the field, like you said. But just to add on onto the thoughts on the race, I thought people expected there to be more opportunities to overtake, hence why people took the grid penalties this week. But it seemed to be that people would just get stuck in a massive DRS train, which resulted in Albon managing to keep for P10. Because I think behind that, you had all the way back to 16th, was from P10 to 16th, was a massive DRS train where no one could overtake anyone for the majority of the race, which is why I said earlier it was like a parade. But yeah, I think people just misjudged being able to overtake around this track this weekend. And I'm sure that will change for the future races here and other races this year. But yeah, it was, like you said, domination from Max, and a bit disappointing from some of the others, but I'm sure they've just come back from the summer break. They'll get straight back into things next week and for the rest of the season. Moving on from our thoughts on the race, we'll move on to the incident report. There aren't actually that many incidents to go through in this race. The majority of them, well, both of them happened on lap 1. So we'll go through them. So obviously the big one, or the most obvious one, was Hamilton and Alonso. They tangled at, I think you pronounce this Lecom. I don't know how to pronounce it.
It's Lecom.
I think it's Lecom. And it left the Mercedes driver up in the air, ever so slightly. And then it left him out of the race, Lewis Hamilton out of the race. Pretty much, Alonso came up Lewis' insides going up to Lecom, and Lewis couldn't see him. He was in his blind spot, so he thought he'd left enough room, but he didn't. So he came straight back across and just went up over Alonso's car, and Alonso went underneath him, and that was it. So Joe, what were your thoughts on that incident between Lewis Hamilton and Alonso?
I think it was just a bit of a clumsy incident, and again, as in Lewis Hamilton says, 100% his fault.
Yeah, like you said, he did during the race come to the media paddock and said it was all his fault. He didn't see him. But it was quite a funny comment from Alonso during the race on his radio where he said this guy can't race unless he's starting from P1. I felt like it was a bit unfair. Just he said it in the heat of the moment, but it just happens. It's a bit of laughter, a bit of fun for from Alonso, so nothing too major there. And then also happening at the same time, just a little bit behind them at the same corner, Bottas spun out and was beached in the gravel when he was trying to avoid Nicholas Latifi, who was forced slightly wide, who went into the gravel himself, and he slightly lost control of the car and spun across the track, which meant Bottas had to make avoidable contact, forcing him off the track and then beached into the gravel. Nothing really much you can say about that, is there, Joe? There's not really anything else that either of them could have done, really.
No, as in it's just the nature of the track being gravel, which I'm very, very happy there is gravel, because there's also gravel on turn 1 as well.
Yes.
So then people can't run wide, which is a good addition. So then people just can actually be more aware that if they run wide, they're going to go in the gravel and potentially get stuck. So yeah, going back to that incident, there's not much to say. It was just Latifi spinning and then Bottas doing the right thing and trying to avoid collision, but just that evasive action just made him lose control of the car.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that the gravel, actually, because you probably mentioned in the preview that there was a few changes to the track this weekend. Obviously, the big one being Eau Rouge with more runoff space. But like I said, there are more gravel traps as well, which meant that drivers had to be more careful. They couldn't just fully commit and have a runoff to then keep going and keep the same speed. So I think that was a good addition from Spa this weekend to mix things up and not make it as easy for people to run wide and carry on going. So that was one thing that worked really well this weekend from them. Onto the final incident. It wasn't really much of an incident, but I thought I'd bring it up. You mentioned it earlier with Leclerc and some sort of visor tape going into his brake duct. I think we then later found out that it came from Verstappen, who was in front of him at the time. He peeled off his during the race, which you are entitled to do, and unfortunately it just flew straight into Leclerc's brake duct, causing him to pit so early on and then getting stuck behind a lot of cars in one of those DRS trains early on in the race. So what were your thoughts on this incident?
It's just unfortunate. I don't think you can really do much about it. It's just an unfortunate incident, and effectively Leclerc should have, I think, was in front of Verstappen at one point and just should have just stayed in front of him. I think that's the way you can only take away from this incident, of that Max just threw his visor screen thing, which as you said, every driver is entitled to do, and just got caught in a brake duct. There is something that I think has to be kind of looked at within that, because it is a safety issue that nobody can kind of control. But apart from that, if you look at this this season, it's just unfortunate.
Yeah, there's not really much else you could do there, unless he was in front of him, like you said. But nothing really much you could do there. So moving on from our incident report, I'll now go through each team and how many points they got this week. And like we said, it was a pretty much domination all weekend from the Red Bull team. But Max did put his car on pole, but obviously went to the back of the grid. But he still managed to win. And Perez, his teammate, came second. So they got maximum points this weekend of 44. Ferrari were next with the next biggest total. They got 23, with Sainz finishing on the podium in third and Leclerc finishing sixth. Funny enough, Leclerc should have finished fifth in all opinions, but for some stupid reason, as Ferrari keep doing, they pulled him in to change the soft tyre to try and get the fastest lap. But then he came out behind Alonso. He did eventually overtake him and didn't get the fastest lap. But when he came back in at the end of the race, he was 1 km/h faster than the pit lane speed limit, which meant he got a 5-second penalty at the end of the race, moving Alonso ahead of him. So Alonso finished 5th and Leclerc finished 6th. So they got 23 points. And mentioning Alonso, Alpine were 3rd with the next total amount of points. They got 16, with Alonso finishing 5th, like I said, and Ocon finishing 7th. So a very good weekend for Alpine. And then next was Mercedes, with still only one of their cars finishing in Russell, who came P4th. Maybe could have come 3rd if didn't, like you said, make mistakes towards the end. He was the only driver to get points for Mercedes this weekend. As we said earlier, Hamilton DNF'd. And then there are 3 other teams to get points. Aston Martin, they got 4, with a very solid drive from Vettel to finish 8th. AlphaTauri got 2, with another good drive this weekend from Gasly. I think it was the first time they've got points in quite a while, actually, AlphaTauri, so it was a good weekend for them. And then, like I mentioned, Albon had a great weekend as well, finishing 10th, holding off everyone in that DRS train. And so Williams got 1 point. Every other team, so that's McLaren, Alfa Romeo, and Haas, all came away with 0 points this weekend. So not the best weekend as a McLaren fan, but I'm sure there'll be better weekends to come. But Joe, what were your thoughts on some of the teams' races this weekend?
I think the main one, as you said, Ferrari just being a bit. I don't know what Ferrari are doing at the moment. They're kind of giving away a championship, I would say, in terms of trying to actually fight Verstappen, and it's not Leclerc's fault. There was 1K over the speed limit because apparently there's a sensor issue on Leclerc's car, so you couldn't really get the correct. I don't know. There was an excuse there, but it's just I don't think it was worth the risk. Which I don't know where in Italy this person's doing the strategy and then saying, oh, you've got to come out buying Alonso, and then you can try and get the fastest lap. It just doesn't really make sense. And also the fact is that there's a risk of a 5-second penalty, which I don't think Ferrari should have played with. And then science just looks slow, as in the Mercedes of Russell's just started reeling him in. So that's a worry for them. The fact is that Mercedes look quick. Then going on to Mercedes as well, again, Russell looked very impressive. And then Hamilton as well, if he didn't have that lap 1 incident, could have, I think, got P4, P5. So that would have pushed Leclerc even further down in hypothetical terms. And then what else? Williams as well, as he said, Albon, very, very solid job in P10. And then another one in AlphaTauri and Gasly, I think going from the back of the grid in the pit lane to, I think, P9 or P8?
It was P9.
P9. So it's a very impressive drive from him as well.
Yes, that's the thoughts on the race. Moving on to the final thing of the podcast is our drive of the day. And like you mentioned there, you mentioned 2 of the drivers that we mentioned before we started recording this podcast of Gasly and Albon. And we also mentioned the 3rd driver, which was pretty obvious because he went from 14th to 1st of Max Verstappen. So Joe, if you had to choose between one of those 3, which one would you choose and why?
I would for me, I would probably have to choose Max, as it was just an absolute dominant performance. Like we haven't seen this season and this era of F1 in terms of new cars, and literally, it's good. He's got to win it, and it's just when. And I think it probably at this point be around Japan. It looks like, because he's gonna. I can't remember how many points now. Probably nearly over 100, or maybe 90 in the 90s. So it's gonna happen. It's just a when, and that's why it's just an utter dominant performance by Max.
Yeah, he's on track to break quite a few records at this point in time. Not quite beating Vettel in the youngest driver to have 2 world championships, but there are others as like having the biggest gap between first and second place. But I'm sure something might happen. You never know. He might bottle it, but I don't think he will. I think it's his to lose now. And like you said, he was the driver of the day today. But obviously, I've got to choose someone else, and I'm probably going to go with Albon, just for the fact he's in a Williams. He came P10, started P6 as well. He got into Q3 in qualifying for the first time this year, which meant that every driver has now got into Q3 this year. So he started sixth with all the penalties. He probably knew he wasn't going to stay that high, but the fact he managed to stay in the points and finish P10, holding off everyone in that massive long DRS train when he didn't have DRS himself, was that Williams certainly had some speed on the straights this weekend. No one seems to know where it came from, but they seem to have it. So just for his defensive drive and the fact that he finished in P10, I'm going to give my driver of the day to Albon this week. But that wraps up the podcast for this week. Don't forget, later on this week, we will have a preview for the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, because that is this weekend as well. I believe we have 3 races in a row. So we had Spa, Zandvoort, and I think another one
Monza.
the following week. What's that?
Monza, I think it is.
Monza, that's it. So there's 3 in a row. So we've got a busy schedule in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, join us for that. That'll be out some point this week. But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you have anything to say on what we've said in this podcast or any thoughts on the race yourself, don't be afraid to drop them down in the comments. But thank you for listening again. And we'll see you again in a couple of days.